Gag me with a spoon. Is a federal appeals court going to shut Trump the hell up or not? Tanya Chutkin, who's the judge overseeing the federal election interference case involving Donald Trump, had issued a limited gag order, basically saying, Donald Trump, please do not incite violence against court officers and witnesses. Like, just don't do that. And he has appealed, and it's gone to a panel of federal judges. Oral arguments were yesterday, and they were, I have to say, actually kind of interesting. I found myself a little bit tempted to agree with Donald Trump's lawyer. And if you had that sentence on your bingo card, congratulations, because I think you are alone. The argument was basically, hey, Donald Trump might find himself in a presidential debate against President Biden, and he might have to or want to talk about the testimony that was given against him. And he might want to say, Mike Pence is a raving lunatic and no one can believe anything that guy says. And he has to have a First Amendment right to do this. Do you guys find yourselves at all biting on this argument? Paul, you're the lawyer and you're shaking your head. So
the answer is no. The gag order is a fairly limited gag order trying to protect court personnel and the administration of justice, also trying to deal with Trump's penchant for witness intimidation, either through himself or his goons or his attorneys. And I listened to a good part of the oral argument yesterday. So the panel of judges are two Obama appointees and a Biden appointee. And there wasn't any political questioning. It was really about how do we protect the administration of justice? And as far as I could tell, the Trump lawyer's argument was until there's an actual threat against somebody in this case, there can be no gag order because you haven't shown any reason to have a gag order. Now, this comes in the overall context of threats in other cases. It was just a lie that there was no threat in this case. With a guy like Trump, you have a legitimate worry. Yes, he retains his First Amendment rights to engage in spirited political debate. He can say all the things he wants about politics. He just can't incite violence and make threats against court personnel or intimidate witnesses.
What do you make of the scenario that they laid out that he might have to go into a debate with a card, a little index card, with a pre-printed statement from his lawyer to any question about the insurrection case? I mean, is that, because that would seem to be, I'm just going to devil's advocate this, that would seem to be a little weird at the very least, that you can't comment on a major issue in the election.
No, he doesn't need a card. He needs a brain. The guy has jello for brains at this point. And the problem with Trump is he's on autopilot. He's like a Pavlovian dog who simply spews hatred and bile instead of any kind of rational or control or reasonable argument. So what he's got to do is stop short of intimidating witnesses and stop short of attacking court personnel. It doesn't mean that in a debate he can't engage in whatever spirited argument he wants to make. He can, talk about his innocence. He can say, I think it's a specious argument.
But Paul, how scrambled can his brains be when his doctor just put out a letter saying that he's in extraordinary mental condition and, by the way, physical condition as well? I mean, Alicia, I assume that your Trump MASH poster that's up on your wall is basically Rambo Trump, right? Like that's...
He's a rom-com hero.
He's a fat lunatic. I don't know what the doctor's talking about. What's amazing as I'm listening to you guys talk is to think where we are in the United States of America in 2020, that we are having a discussion about whether the leading Republican for the president of the United States of America should be allowed to exercise his free speech and what limits those should have. That's what we're talking about. That's insane that we're at this point in the world. That's insane that this is where we are. And I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Now, I listened to and read some of the discussion from the gag order hearing, and my opinion is this. I'd love for a judge to be like, you're not allowed to speak, period. But I know that's unconstitutional. I'd love to get the guy to just shut up. It is a difficult balance, but one of the judges presented a good example. What if, the night before testifying, Donald Trump comes out and goes on social media and says, Mike Pence has one more day to do the right thing, the day before Mike Pence is to testify at a trial. That can put him in danger. Donald Trump has put this man in danger. Donald Trump incited an insurrection where people had nooses and cages and enchanted to kill Mike Pence. I don't know the law. I'll leave that to Paul and to the panel of judges. I think he has to have the right to free speech, but I think he also has to be limited so he can't incite violence against potential witnesses.
So remember, this is a guy who's facing 91 criminal charges in various courts. In my view, there is before he was indicted and enmeshed in the criminal judicial system, and then there's after he was enmeshed in the criminal judicial system. I mean, we've never faced a situation where we had to balance First Amendment rights to odious political speech with the administration of justice. I mean, what Trump is after is to be able to say crazy, outrageous things that either intimidate witnesses and change their testimony because they're afraid, or to be so outrageous that a judge extends the gag order more and more restrictively, and then he argues for a mistrial because the gag order was overly restrictive and he wasn't allowed to say X, Y, or Z. I mean, it's not dumb strategy on his part to be fighting everything every inch of the way, but I don't think it's an argument that he's going to win.
It's so obvious. Trump has disqualified himself so many times over from not only ever holding public office, but walking free again. It's so inherently obvious to us, and it's so non-obvious to the public, and it's kind of staggering. And in that vein, Paul, you wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that young voters who are so reliably liberal-leaning Democratic Party voting seem to be kind of meh on the Joe Biden versus Donald Trump question. And actually, according to that New York Times Siena College poll of 6 battleground states that we talked about on this show a couple weeks ago, Joe Biden only has a 1-point lead among what should be his strongest group. Alicia, what do you make of that aspect of this?
You have to take a deep dive into who is answering these polls. People answering the polls are people invested in some capacity. Young people are not invested right now. I've got a 19-year-old. Let me assure you, we talk every single day. The only time she's ever brought up presidential politics was yesterday. They're not invested right now. And so the only polls are the people who are, and they aren't an accurate look at what's actually happening in the country. There's no way Donald Trump is close.
There are just plain logical reasons to not believe the results you're getting, or to just understand that they are of very limited value. At the same time, I've never liked the argument, I don't believe the polls, because there are things that polls can do for you predictively. Alicia, your argument that you are concerned about differential response bias, okay? You are worried that the people who are answering the calls are highly motivated for one reason or another to answer those calls, and therefore, statistically, they do not represent the underlying population, right? And there is some evidence out there that is what's going on with young voters. I would refer people to Dan Cox, an excellent social scientist who is at the American Enterprise Institute. He goes through that New York Times polling and says what you just said, which is that there's good reason to think that right now, the young people who are picking up the phone and willing to talk to pollsters, given the relative amount of disengagement from voters right now, are the ones who have an axe to grind.
Biden is underwater to Trump generally However, when a Democrat versus Trump is asked, the generic Democrat wins for president. So that gives me some hope that whatever the truth of all this is, as the year goes on, those voters are going to find no home except with Democrats, and they will grudgingly come back to the elder statesman of the Democratic Party, who has the wisdom and gravitas to lead the country at age 81.
There has been a deliberate and a pretty pervasive attempt to sanitize Donald Trump and to treat this political moment as another horse race story, another, oh, that zany Trump, he's at it again. And, how will this affect his standing against, how will the fact that he called his political opponents vermin who should be eradicated, how will that affect his standing with swing suburban moms age 18 to 34? Who gives a shit, right? He's a violent fascist. We tend to treat these things lightly because, it's a defense mechanism, and because we're so unused to having to talk in such stark terms, and the media is aiding and abetting the entire enterprise by sanitizing it. All right, for Paul and Alicia, I'm Matt. We will see you next time.